Hello there, I'm Sanj from Inclusive Magic, and you're listening to the Koanversation, a podcast about Zen nuggets to free your mind and inspire new thinking. My guest today is somebody I'm very excited to bring onto the show, Derek Gummer, a motorcyclist, philosopher, and swordsmith who runs his own channel on YouTube, which you can find at Del350K4, where he literally forges swords himself. He also happens to be my brother-in-law and my very good friend. And we're going to talk about Koan number 4, which is called the Beardless Foreigner. Del, thanks for being on the show. Welcome.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
We were walking earlier today, and you told me a koan that you'd heard when you were 7 years old. Can you remind me what it was?
My father asked me when I was 7 or 8, what is the Dharma body of the Buddha? And the answer he gave me was, the Dharma body of the Buddha is the hedge at the bottom of the garden.
And I asked you what you made of that, and you said, I was 7. Which is fair enough. Now, looking back at that, I mean, what do you think that's all about?
I have asked myself sporadically, many times over the years, about that koan. And the koan isn't a riddle with a single, clear, definable answer. Mm-hmm. And as you said in the intro to episode 1, it's best to think of it perhaps as a sort of springboard for free thought. The hedge at the bottom of the garden is an entity, it's alive. It's arguable whether or not that entity has any real degree of consciousness or awareness, and yet it's intuitive to agree that the hedge at the bottom of the garden, being part of the great matrix of life all around us, is indeed part of the Dharma body of the Buddha, if not the entirety thereof. Mm-hmm. I've often wondered about plants' consciousness and awareness, because in the short time I've been alive, we've realised that there is more to plants than we had hitherto believed in terms of their ability to perceive their surroundings and indeed to react to their surroundings. For example, there are some plants and bushes which are aware that they're being chomped on by herbivores and will drastically increase their alkaloid content in their leaves in the short term, in real time, to discourage those herbivores. That makes me wonder whether we really need a brain to be aware of what's around us, and whether our consciousness is simply a product of the electromechanical function of our brain.
I mean, yeah, it's hotly debated, right? Like, is consciousness anything more than those impulses? There are so many theories of mind, like the modular theory of mind, where what you understand to be yourself is not this continuous CEO running all the different processes in your brain, but actually your brain's made up of all these modules, and what you think is yourself is just the sort of post-hoc spokesperson trying to put a spin on a choice that's been made before you know it.
That's a very interesting idea.
Well, there's a great book, Robert Wright, Why Buddhism is True, about this. All right, the koan that we're going to look at, number 4, is one where when I first read it, I was like, what? Really? And I thought, is it really fair to bring a guest on to discuss something as sort of, I don't want to say inane, but that's kind of how I felt at the time. But I realised, actually, this is an incredibly rich koan. I really like it. And that just goes to show that the instinctual logic, analytical mind that you look at these things with, and, you know, maybe our prejudgments can be so wrong, and then when you open yourself to something, you're like, wow, that's pretty cool. So, here is koan number 4, the Beardless Foreigner. Wakuan is the name of this monk, the main character in this. When Wakuan saw a picture of bearded Bodhidharma, who's the founder of Zen, he said, "Why hasn't that fellow got a beard?" I'll say that again. When Wakuan saw a picture of bearded Bodhidharma, he complained, "Why hasn't that fellow got a beard?" Bodhidharma was the founder of Zen, and he was well known for having a beard.
I've never heard this koan before. It's certainly thought-provoking, and I'd be very interested to know, Sanj, what your conclusions are.
So, for me, and this is why I thought of you, actually, because I see a guy who's been studying in this environment and told a certain thing for a long time, then sees this thing that everybody sees, but he doesn't see it the way they see it. And he doesn't slavishly, he's like, I'm not just going to unthinkingly adopt what you all have. I don't see a beard on this guy. And the whole point of Zen is you can't just accept what your teachers tell you. You're supposed to realize things for yourself. And in this moment, he looks at a painting of the founder, at something that should be really just taken for granted. And he's like, I just don't see this beard. I'm going to call it how I see it.
So from there, we get a message of independent thought and of having the courage to express unusual opinions that might not be well received, and risk being thought an imbecile. He's not safeguarding his status within his little community. Mm-hmm. He's absolutely determined to be frank and open and not to follow the masses, but to insist upon his right to see the world, to express the way he sees the world around him in his own way and with a degree of courage. He's risking ridicule.
He's being more Zen than anybody in that moment because he's seeing what he sees.
Mm-hmm.
And I suppose, just like the first koan is not about the dog, apparently, neither of this is this about the beard. I'll read you what Yamada says. Yamada says, when you touch your beard with your hand, does your mind have a beard? The mind is the agent controlling the movement of the hand. You can see your hand, you can touch your beard, you can recognize everything that's yours, your fingers, your head, etc. But where is you? You yourself is no other than your mind, and your mind has no beard. So what Wakuan is really saying to us is Bodhidharma's essential nature has no beard.
Wow, yeah, love it. Wish I'd thought of that.
Me too. Can we talk about the t-shirt stuff that's been going on today? Because I feel like there's an element of that here. So you've got a t-shirt that's kind of paint stained, right?
Yeah.
And you wore this yesterday, and actually nobody bats an eyelid, but people close to you maybe feel that wearing such a t-shirt is ill-advised, uncouth. I don't know what adjective.
Yeah, I think uncouth yeah? is pretty much getting there, and potentially offensive to others by virtue of its paint-stained nature.
Sure. You are somebody who believes, you believe what you believe, you have the courage to live a life that's very authentic to you.
Mm-hmm.
Is that challenging?
I needed to liberate myself quite early in my adult life from social strictures in order to find a sort of mental landscape in which I could roam and play. In order to do that, I realised that I needed to become indifferent to mild social criticism about things like personal appearance. Mm-hmm. I didn't understand how I could be a less worthwhile person because my t-shirt was stained with paint or because there was a hole in my trousers. And I think there's an assumption that if a person goes abroad amongst his fellow people dressed in such a way, it's disrespectful towards them or potentially offensive to them. I think by deliberately choosing to become indifferent to the mutters, the whispers and the looks askance, I was programming myself to be more independent in terms of the formation of my own views and opinions. I was inuring myself against the opprobrium of others to a limited extent, to an extent that lets me be able to be completely unconcerned about unnecessary things in order to allow my own mind to concentrate on the things that it finds important or entertaining. I have in my life decided to try being very poor. When I was a young man, I moved from a comfortable and well provided for life in southeast England to one of the Balearic Islands where I lived in a cave. For food, I would go to the market and scrounge vegetables and fish which wouldn't last till the following day in the heat. And I was able to feed myself in that way. And for the first time in my life, I had an excess of free time. I have been through periods of being cash rich and time poor, and I know which I prefer. I once sat upon a beach with a multimillionaire. He said, "I envy you." I said, "Why do you envy me? You're wealthy." I'm poor. And he said, no man ever lay on his deathbed and said, I wish I'd worked more. Perhaps if it were possible for all of the 8 billion people on this planet to find work which was for them intensely fulfilling, that might not be the case. But for now, while most of us are forced to earn our living in a way which we find either unfulfilling or even ethically questionable, we need to find other sources of satisfaction. We can't tell ourselves that the way we earn our living is our raison d'etre if we are unfulfilled by the way we earn our living. There have been periods when I've been financially destitute, but as the multimillionaire on the beach noticed, completely content and free of regrets. I'm most content when I am seized with a creative urge and am swept along like a twig in a river, quite unable to do anything to resist the power of that urge, and forced by some part of my own mind to think of nothing, or as little as possible, other than the task in which I am engaged until it's finished. If that task, such as forging a blade, takes me, a less than competent swordsmith, several days, I'm forced to come out of my creative frenzy to feed myself and even to sleep, to interact with others, to go and buy food. Yet during the period in which I'm intoxicated by that creative frenzy, those activities seem marginal, almost like something from a dream. The real life experience for me then lies in giving in to that creative urge and thinking of as little as possible other than the work I'm doing.
It's the state of flow, being in the zone, and it's yeah, there's nothing better than that. And it's like you forget yourself, but you also enjoy yourself. That's magical. And I wanted to go back, you made a really good point about programming and stuff. Programming is a key word here, because the programming of social acceptance is so deep,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it comes potentially from the fear of being exiled from the community when you're a hunter-gatherer or whatever.
Quite.
Because you'll die. You would die by being exiled that way.
Ostracization in those days would have been a death sentence.
Yeah.
And we carry the vestiges of those mindsets to this day. It's interesting to see, when I walk through the streets of London, how I observe people looking askance at those sitting on the floor with one hand out or a hat stretched out or their hands stretched out. People step over them or walk past them, and sometimes they give alms, they give money, but often there's no eye contact or a very minimal acknowledgement that one is giving money to help support another person who's in difficulty. People will slow down, fumble for a coin, throw it into the hat and keep walking. I think there's a degree of disdain for the weak man, the man who has fallen, and there's a fear that it might be contagious. Why not stop and talk to this person? But we don't. We throw them a pound coin and keep walking. The pound coin is perhaps to make ourselves feel better, to buy a little self-forgiveness for our comparative good fortune. And I think also there's a fear of being tainted by association.
In America, LA, there's a large homelessness problem. Lots of people come to LA in pursuit of a dream. It's a merciless city where those dreams go unfulfilled for most people. And there's no safety net, and loads of people end up sleeping rough. And the euphemistic way that the law deals with this is what's called quality of life offences, where they arrest people, use it as a chance to move homeless encampments out of areas where it's going to disturb the aesthetic of the area. And that's a really dehumanising way to talk about suffering of people.
It is, because when you said quality of life, I assumed that we were referring to the quality of life of those poor unfortunates.
Exactly, but we're not, and that's the sort of staggering cognitive, like the sort of absurdness there. This is not satire.
No,
but it's for reals.
Yeah,
you said something really. You're right about this. If people are in certain circumstances, I think we need to sometimes justify in our mind, we need to rationalise why somebody's suffering is not our problem. You feel guilt. I will walk by, I feel heartbroken for a lot of the people. I feel a deep sense of guilt at my own comparative fortunateness.
So I think we're tempted to build defensive bulwarks against that guilt by saying, well, I worked very hard. I acquired qualifications. I made sacrifices and maybe even some compromises to reach a state of financial comparative comfort and well-being. So one of the first things we do is tell ourselves that perhaps the homeless person deserved their plight. And one of the second things we do is tell ourselves that we deserve our non-homeless situation through hard work and effort and a degree of commitment to an ideal. But in fact, there is a large element of chance in all this, and any one of us could have suffered similar misfortunes.
It is incredibly sad that we can't even take the time to remember that these are fellow human beings who actually, just for circumstances, are in a dramatically awful situation. I want to come back to one topic, which is, let's go back to this guy who's speaking his truth and being authentic. Do you find that actually, a lot of people can be threatened by somebody who is living so authentically, and a lot of the time the sort of revulsion to it is actually because a little part of you wishes that you had the courage to do it yourself, right?
Yeah, that might be the case. My wife has brightly coloured dreadlocks. Even when I've been with her, at least 3 or 4 times, I've seen people accost her and say, I wish I had the courage to be like you. They always start with, I love your hair. And then they say, I wish I had the courage to do that, to live like that. And I understand that many of those people, for employment reasons, would be unable to have that personal appearance. And others are really saying, I fear the reactions of those around me if you work from home, or if there's no constraint that prevents you from expressing yourself quite that drastically and liberally. There are still many people who just don't want to be so obviously different, who want to express themselves, but who are too conditioned to fear sneers and hostile glances, to feel comfortable if they ever were to allow themselves to be quite that freaky.
It's credit to the people who are willing to do that, because that pushes, I think that has always been the thing that pushes the limits of our expression forward. I don't think anybody playing it safe has ever really moved the conversation culturally very far forward.
Yeah. But yes, I think society has changed enormously over the last 40 or 50 years, and to an extent some of those drivers have been radical thinkers who aren't afraid to wear outward signs of their radical opinions. No, it's not radical. That's not what I'm looking for.
And to bring this back to the Koan, I'm thinking, the Yamada's commentary that Bodhidharma is not the beard. You're mistaking the beard for the guy, and the guy is not describable. The mind, who we are is often how much do you find who you are is a concept that exists separately to your relationships and how others perceive you.
Does that vary with a person's age? When I was 17, I remember wanting to find a persona. I knew that I didn't just want to wear smartly tailored shirts and get a white collar job. And I wanted to find a group to which I could belong. And there was no such group. I hung out with the hard case bikers. I hung out with the hippies. and no set of values quite seemed to square with my own. Those hippies rejected me. I was different from them. I sat amongst them, I talked with them, but I felt within a day that I could never be of their group. We were allied in that we had rejected the precepts of our mainstream society, and yet we instinctively knew that we were not from the same tribe.
What was the difference?
When I was sitting at the side of the road, a shiny Range Rover drove past. One of the people sitting with me spat upon it, and I was surprised and completely confused. I didn't know why he'd done it. And yet others nodded with approval. Did they resent what they would perceive as the vulgarity of one person owning such a luxurious and prestigious vehicle? Did its position there in this community seem offensively incongruous? Or was the objection more profound? I was in a seaside village and there were some people there who had a lifestyle whereby they would travel to India, buy silver, bring it back, without specifying whether or not they declared the silver, and they would make leather and silver jewellery at the side of the road and sell it. And I think part of the appeal for the customers was the fact that they could actually see that it was being handmade by a person squatting in the grit at the edge of the highway. It felt authentic to the buyer. Mm-hmm. Why do people prefer to buy artisanally made products? They're less perfect than a mass-produced item. They're usually more expensive, and yet we value them more. Mm-hmm. Is it possible that when we make something, we put something of ourselves into that thing, and that everyone realises this, perhaps unconsciously?
And in the same way that Koan, the essence of him is not the beard. Underneath the beard is that mind. And in the same way, what you perceive when you get into the sort of Satori state that Zen is all about is never going to be the trappings that you describe like a beard. It's going to be this unlimited mind. But listen, it's been such a pleasure to talk to you, Del, as always. Thanks so much for joining me for this Koanversation. And remember, do check out Del's YouTube channel, Del350K4, where you'll see some of his incredible self-taught technical prowess in a variety of creative, he's a true maker. Thanks for listening, and see you next time for another Koanversation.